Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to the first ever ASA RISE. You know that this session is being recorded so that if you miss any part of it, you'll be able to access it through our ASA website. My name is Cynthia Banks, and I am a facilitator, a co-facilitator with Dr. Patrice Dickerson for the ASA RISE program. ASA RISE is a launching pad for the next generation of aging leadership by creating BIPOC leadership, by creating a BIPOC leadership pool that improves policies and programs on aging at the local, state, and national level. Aging in America, in the United States, has never been an equitable experience across the barriers of economic and social justice. ASA wants to make sure that our leaders, our BIPOC leaders, are prepared for older adults of diversity. The ASA RISE program is, as I said earlier, a leadership training program to advance people of color in the field of aging and contribute to other diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that ASA is building. Today, we have with us 3 alumni from the ASA RISE program. We have Julia Yarborough, Dr. Ernestine Thomas, and Angela King. What we would like to do today is first get from them why they are passionate about the field of aging. And then we're going to talk about caregiving, as this month is National Family Caregiving Month. And so we look forward to seeing your questions in the chat, and to the extent that we have time, we will be able to respond to them. So first, we're going to start with Julia. What's your why for aging? Tell us.
Cynthia, thank you, first of all, for being part of this panel, and for all of you who are joining us. We're glad that we're able to share our stories. And my why really resonates from my mother, Mrs. Nellie P. Yarbo. And I cared for my mom until her passing at age 90. And as I was leaning into that role of family caregiver, I thought that I was ready for the process, pre-planning, having insurance in place, trying to educate myself. But once I actually got into the hands-on, the real work of caring for my mom, I discovered that I was still overwhelmed emotionally, physically, financially. And that was with having a career that afforded me the opportunity to cover some of the costs, to have extra help, to have the know-how of pulling out information, asking for resources. And even so, I was still overwhelmed. I had a supportive employer on top of that, and I was still physically overwhelmed. So I think about others who don't have those resources, who aren't aware, who aren't in a moment of pre-planning. I'm a woman of color, as is my mom. We live in a slightly rural area. So there was that whole aspect of it. And I realized, okay, we are really drowning in this. So in the short term, I want to educate people so they know what is out there in our landscape. Long term, I want to be an advocate to start to drive change so that when I'm at the point where my mom was at, I know that I'll be taken care of.
Thank you, Julia. Dr. Thomas, what's your why for aging?
Well, I want to also echo what Julie just indicated. Thanks again for allowing me to be a part of this platform. It's wonderful to have this opportunity through ASA RISE. But my why, it came to me very slowly. I think because I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and as I became an adult, I recognized probably my parents were sending us to our grandparents to get rid of us for the summer, probably. But in any case, in spending that time with my grandparents, I was nurtured a lot with them, and I was the first grandchild to be with them the entire time. But as I became older, I recognized I wanted to be in a career that would change people's lives and help their lives. And I continued working with older adults. And I became the primary caregiver for my parents as well. My father was 79 when he passed away, my mother 76, which really these days, that's not really old, what we would consider to be old. But that was because of a number of reasons. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more. But it's to help those who may not be in the situation where I am and to be able to change their lives for the better.
Thank you. Angela, tell us your why.
Yes, and thank you, as everyone has said, thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's so needed. But similar to Miss Julia and Dr. Thomas, my why comes from personal experience. Years ago, my mom and I, we both served as a primary caregiver to my grandfather who had Alzheimer's. And that was a very challenging experience because back then, there were very few support services and resources available to us to actually help us navigate that particular journey. So we did struggle a bit and kind of had to figure things out along the way. But fast forward to today, professionally, I work with family caregivers, and I still notice, as Ms. Julia said, that there is a lack of support services for them. So right now, I would say that my why has definitely evolved over the years, and now I am working to ensure that family caregivers are equipped with the knowledge, skills, and tools needed to deliver quality care to their loved ones. And I'm working on a few things to make that happen. I can't share them right now, but I'm working on a few exciting things to help make that happen.
Well, thank you, Julia. No, Julia, I'm sorry. Thank you, Angela. Julia, we know that you shared with us that you were a caregiver for your mom. Tell us what you know about the current landscape for caregiving and how it's impacting the community around you.
Coming from my personal experience, one of the first things that I realized is that there's a patchwork of services and different agencies for the care that's out there. And many of the care providers within the medical field and other support services, in my experience, did not seem to have the level of knowledge of really understanding some of the other support services that are needed for family caregivers. For instance, if I'm a primary care doctor and the bulk of my patients are older patients with maybe a family caregiver helping them, if I know no information on local services that provide assisted living or skilled nursing, and a patient asks me that, I should have a little bit of that information. I found that there was a gap in those services. The local EMTs, young, strong, strapping men and women, but maybe not fully trained in dealing with a larger population of older adults and their family caregivers. So that was number one. Number two, sad to say, much of what I saw, the care was driven by money and profits, not by care and compassion in terms of products and services provided to individuals that needed the care, constantly pushing for hospice services when maybe that's not what the person needed, maybe wanting palliative services, but the hospital not having a palliative unit because it doesn't make money. So it was then disbanded. So not so much compassion and care, but profits and bottom line. And that was very disheartening to me and something that I, want people to understand.
Yeah, and you see that all over. It's all about the money and not necessarily about the person. So your professional work is a communications consultant. However, because of your experiences, you went on and you have published content with ASA, and you have a regular publication called Keeping It Real, as we see in your background, a caregiver's newsletter. Why do you want to do this? And what do you want others to know?
It really ties back to that original why, Cynthia, that I believe that so many of us, myself included, in the beginning, we don't know what we don't know. And when that happens, all of a sudden, you're now in this world of family caregiving and you're scrambling to think about finding services. Who do I call? What's available in my area? What do I need to know about insurance, about Medicare and Medicaid, about family savings? Understanding the very real difference between ALF and SNF. one of the things I've written about several times is how important it is to know your acronyms. And in many industries, we operate in acronyms. But if you don't understand the difference between those two, you could sign something or agree to something without understanding what that means for the care of your loved one or for you. And I called my publication is Keeping It Real because I think there are amazing organizations, including ASA, that are doing phenomenal work to provide information and services and research. But when you get down to that nitty-gritty item, such as one of the things that I talk about is I encourage people to always ask, if you have to have facility care, how many days a week does your loved one get a shower? That's not a question many people would ever think to ask because they think, well, mom or dad or aunt or uncle or myself, surely I'll get a shower every day. But if you don't understand that staffing doesn't allow for that, you may not understand that then that could lead to UTIs, which then leads to being in the hospital, which then leads to other decline. So the real down and dirty items I like to share with people so that they have that information and educate, plan, prepare, and be practical about it.
Now, you talked about the things you've learned. What was the most challenging point in your caregiving journey? The aha moment?
So many along the way, but one that truly stands out is a concept of being an advocate, that as a family caregiver, you must be an advocate for your loved one. Hospital care. The thing that stands out to me the most was that I know my mom's benchmark. I knew her medications and I understood what each of those medications did and when she was supposed to have them. In a hospital stay, all of that changed because they put mom on a routine that matched with when they did meds. She had an instant decline in her cognitive skills. She was on neurological medication, has to be given at the same time. All of that changed. Within 48 hours, mom's benchmark had declined so much that the doctors are looking at her thinking, oh, this old woman may be on her way out. And I'm thinking, no, this is not my mother right now. Yes, she's in the hospital, but you changed her meds. They have to be what she was on before. Had I not been that advocate for my mother, I think her decline would have continued quickly. I demanded that they put it onto her regular routine. The doctors thought I was a nurse because I knew that much. I said, no, I love my mom. I've educated myself. You have to be an advocate. So that's just one example.
So tell me, what was your mom's response to all of your work and your education and your advocacy?
I wish that some people could have known Miss Nellie. She was a mom had a wonderful passive aggressive edge to her. So on one hand, the aspect was, well, I don't know why you people are bothering so much anyhow. You people meaning me. On the flip side, I think there was a level of appreciation of knowing that she may have felt that something wasn't quite right in her treatment or care, but not having the voice to speak up. And I will share with all of you, especially because we're within our ASA RISE group. There were many times when mom would have the sense that, am I getting the care I'm receiving because I'm Black? Now, that's not to say that we didn't have good care in moments. There were things that I noticed that I'm glad I was an advocate to make sure it was top notch. But as an older Black woman who had experienced a lot of inequities throughout her life, she was very keen on picking up those moments when maybe something didn't feel quite right. And so I am glad that I was there to be her advocate, to ask the questions that simply because of education or exposure, she may not have been able to ask. And I was able to push for the things that I believed were right for her and for our family.
So in a recent piece that's been just dropped, I think yesterday, in Generations Now, you titled it "Preaching Beyond the Choir About Family Caregiving," about a session that was organized in Colorado. Was it Colorado?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Can you tell us about that conversation and how it came about and the audience that was part of that and how they were impacted?
Yes, so my professional background is as a broadcast journalist, more than 25 years plus as a news anchor and reporter, and then, of course, family caregiver. So I'm a big believer in personal stories to drive information and storytelling. One of the things that I would like to see and have been advocating for is more local reporters understanding this issue. I was fortunate while taking care of my mom that still being on air, I was able to then produce some of those stories because I was living it. And I was in a small enough market that my team allowed me to do that. In many instances, reporters may not be living this, so they're not part of this conversation. It's not that they don't want to cover it. It's not that they don't understand it. It's that it's not on their radar because it's not a day of story. It's not breaking news. So two things. I think COVID, the one positive thing that may have come out of COVID is that it put a bright light on the aging space in terms of facility care, family caregivers, the realities that are going on. So that opened the doorway. But all of these other great programs that are out there, services, connecting points for family caregivers, the more journalists that know about it, the more they can share that information with that many more people. So I pitched a session to the Society of Professional Journalists, which is their yearly convention, to talk about family caregiving. Two other ASA RISE fellows joined me in that presentation. I talked about family caregiving. One talked about gerontology. Another talked about family caregiving services. Surprisingly, we had about 22 journalists in our session. This is a tough topic. Everybody on this call knows this is a tough topic. I was thrilled to have that many journalists in the room. And since that session, at least two have let me know that they are working on producing stories or a series of stories about caregiving. So it's that trickle down. Mm-hmm. They now have some ideas of other story topics to then take into their local communities and share those stories. And so that's one of my goals, is to continue taking all of the work that everybody on this call does to then get it out to the masses in a way that's very local, very, surface level.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of a quote that says, and it's an anonymous quote that says, there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. And it sounds like you have been you've been 3 of those people already. And so what do you want your caregiver, if you need one, to be? And how would you want to be treated?
Well, hopefully somebody in the world of science can figure out cloning by the time I get to that point. Miss Nellie had me. I would like my caregiver to be a clone of what I did for my mother, of understanding that it may not always be right, but it's the best you can do. That everybody deserves that dignity and care and compassion and understanding in the last chapter, and to be treated with love and kid gloves. And I understand that when you don't have resources or you don't have extra support, that can be difficult. I would like to hope that by the time I get to that point, that all of us have worked hard enough that we have turned the ship a little bit, so that care is provided and that we all have advocates. I will share with you as I wrap up that there literally sometimes I wake up at night having an anxiety attack thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when I get to that point and I need care? I don't have children. I don't have a Julia to be my advocate. And it scares me. Mm-hmm. So I'm really hopeful that all of us will make those changes. And just one final thought for anybody who's a caregiver out there: if you're in the middle of it, remember, you get to take care of your person. You don't have to, you get to. And you will be so glad if you make that mindset and really appreciate those little nuggets and moments that you get to spend with that person. Even when you're tired and exhausted, you get to do this, and you'll be thankful that you did. And I appreciate everybody being here today.
And thank you so much, Julia. We understand that you have a previous engagement that you must leave us for, but we thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us. We
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much. And I'll be watching everybody else's presentation on video. I want to hear all of it.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Ernestine Thomas, so
Yes.
you have been an advocate for a life course approach in understanding family caregivers of color. What's unique about the trajectory of BIPOC caregivers across the lifespan?
Well, when we're talking about the lifespan, of course, we know life can have its mountaintop experiences and it can have its valleys as well. So when it comes to caregiving across the lifespan, it begins actually at birth. You have the mother caring for their child, and as time goes on, the famous quote that you mentioned by Rosalind Carter, it comes to a time where mom may need to be cared for, or if mom is assisting someone else and caring for them. It's across the lifespan, but life doesn't change. There could be other things involved in that lifespan as well. If someone loses their job, or there could be mental illness going on. So a number of things are happening across the lifespan, but the caregiving still has to continue.
Mhm.
It's just an added layer.
So, really, tell us what has happened in the life of a caregiver by the time they are 40. Do they have different realities than those who are not?
Well, a caregiver of color, it could possibly be because it depends on where you are and as far as finances, emotionally, psychologically, all those things come into play. When they're reaching the age of 40, which is a lot of caregivers of color, during that reaching that age period, then caregivers are have a number of things that they're dealing with. They're raising their families, possibly by the age of 40. They maybe have watched their mom and or dad take care of someone else, and they may be ending up taking care of their parents and still raising a family as well. So there could be a number of issues that have happened since before the age of 40.
And so many times it's after 40. It's when the parents are in their 80s and the child or the caregiver is in their 50 or 60s. And that's really part of the sandwich generation. You advocate that we expand upon and examine the compound caregiving because that's the person taking care of their children or their teenagers. What does that look like, and how do we address that?
Well, to get a full perspective of what's happening in the family, we're also experiencing young adults caring not only for their parents and raising children, but sometimes they're also caring for their grandparents as well. And they're supporting them um, through various health issues, but they're also supporting them financially while they're still trying to take care of their own family needs. So that is what's happening with compound family caregiving. It's now an added layer to the sandwich generation.
Yeah. And so I could tell you a story about my father who's 94 and he has dementia. And I am a long distance. I'm on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. And it's been quite challenging dealing with caregiving for him, making sure that my siblings who are local are doing as they should to make sure that he gets the proper care. Do you have any advice for long distance caregivers like myself?
Oh, absolutely, because we do work with various long distance caregivers, and it all comes down to not only siblings that are in the area, but we tell caregivers to also talk to find out who their neighbors are, who their church family that they're involved with. So finding out who's in your loved one's circle, and most importantly, who has their ear. It may not be that sibling, it may be the pastor that has giving them advice that they would follow more before anyone else. So it's finding out about their world and who's in their immediate circle that would help in the caregiving responsibilities, and also be willing enough to contact you if they're noticing there are differences that are happening in your loved one's life.
Yeah. I remember before my mom passed that she had to go into the hospital. And at the time, she was about 85. And I was the area agency director for Los Angeles County, the second largest jurisdiction of older adults in LA in the world. And I didn't know who to call. And, it's different when it's personal. And all of the folks that are on this call are practitioners in the aging field. And it's different when it's personal, when it impacts you. We can talk about the caregivers that are providing services for other older adults, but when it's your parent, when it's your grandparent, when it's your sibling, how do you address the issue when it's personal, being a practitioner in aging?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when I was a caregiver, specifically for my mom, she pointed out to me very clearly, and I quote, "You are my daughter, not my social worker."
Yes.
So when she said that, that put me in my place to recognize that she needed more emotional support, as opposed to hearing, this is what you should do and this is what you need to do. And so that's when it's personal, we have to keep that line there. Advocating, the education we have in the field of aging is good for advocacy. But when it comes to communicating with our loved one, we have to recognize that we are their family and they need that emotional support more so than hearing about different types of things that we've learned in the field of aging.
Yeah.
And for me, in working in the field of aging and taking care of my parents, I found that I was that 40-year-old social worker raising my children and taking care of my parents. So my time was very limited. A lot of things I learned that I needed to do for myself that I didn't do at the time, which I encourage caregivers to do now. So my journey was through a lot of things I learned from trial and error, even being a social worker in the field of aging. But I could use those things that I learned to support caregivers now.
In ASA RISE in Cohort 1, you were a member of Cohort 1, you shared your personal experience as a caregiver for your parents with us, and we were grateful for that sharing. And the impact that caregiving has on generational wealth in families of color. What do you mean by that?
Well, as you asked about our why in the beginning, and I enjoyed that time with my grandparents. I really did.
Mm-hmm.
When I became an adult, I recognized that my grandparents grew up in they were in poverty. They were impoverished. They didn't have a lot of the services available to them. And that includes not receiving the health care that they needed. And so my parents took care of my grandparents. I watched them do that. And then I took care of my parents, who also, because they weren't able to get the health um, care that they needed, experienced a number of different chronic conditions. I am a first generation college graduate.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents did all that they could to make sure we had what we needed, the education we should receive, and so forth. But because they became ill, what they saved up for their entire life was all diminished when they started to have complications due to health challenges. So when I say generational wealth is not being passed on, I have not received or experienced the opportunity of receiving anything from my grandparents or my parents. I'm working to change that for my children, but that is something that families of color have to recognize. Medicare does not cover everything. Everyone does not qualify for medical assistance or Medicaid. It's that in between, those of us who have worked a number of years, the working generation, who don't make a lot of money and still make too much money at the same time. And so those are the family caregivers that I advocate for.
And I want our participants to know that there's some links being placed in the chat to follow up on this particular issue and other issues that we've discussed during our session today. So can you give us one tip that family caregivers should use to protect their economic security?
We have to communicate. We still don't communicate enough about what we have, let alone what the health issues we may be experiencing in our families. The family meetings and time to have open discussion is so important, and we just don't do that enough. So we need to let our children or someone in our family know this is what I'm experiencing health-wise, and this is what I have as a resource. And then before the crisis happens, a family needs to know that in advance. And then they'll know what directions to take.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Julia, and that is, what kind of caregiver would you like to have should you need one in the future?
Oh, the kind of caregiver that my daughters don't want to talk about right now when I'm trying to have the conversation with them. I want a caregiver that recognizes that my world does not stop because I need care. I am still that same person inside that they knew before I needed to be have care. And I really want, some things like I love light. Keep me in the light. I love being outdoors. Make sure I go for my walks. Those types of things I want the type of caregiving that I want. And I want my caregiver to recognize that I'm still a person.
So is that something that as healthy adults that we should document so that we should be able to share that as part of our trust or our power of attorney for our caregivers to have, take me walking, those kind of things. Is that something that you would recommend?
Absolutely. Put that in writing. There's a wonderful document called 5 Wishes. You can put those types of things that you want done for yourself when you need care, and those things are important. We don't want to lose the opportunities to do those things when we have to have someone there to take care of us.
And where can you find that document, 5 Wishes?
There's an organization called 5 Wishes. You can probably go online. And then sometimes people provide sessions regarding how to complete the document. Some area Office on Aging have them as well. So there are little booklets. Doesn't have to be notarized or anything like that, depending on what state that you're in. And you can put information like that and have it available for your loved ones.
Okay. So just one last question for you, Doctor. What did you learn? What was the most important lesson you learned in your journey in caregiving?
What we say over and over again as caregivers, you have to take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, then if you don't take care of yourself, then you won't be there for your loved one. I had a little technical issue going on here.
Okay.
And know that there is support available if you don't isolate yourself, and recognize there are other caregivers out there. And contact your local area on aging to make sure that you're getting involved and getting resources and information in your community about what is available to meet your needs as a caregiver.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it. I know you're going to be around to answer questions as they
Sure.
come up near the end of our session. So thank you for that. And now we're going to turn to Angela King. And Angela, how do social perceptions and stigma weigh in on the challenges that caregivers face?
Yes, so it weighs on them heavily. In my experience, it seems a lot of people don't have a positive perception of caregiving. I think when some people discover that you're a caregiver, they tend to become distant and feel like they don't want to carry that weight along with you. And I want to point out that I said weight and not burden. Others, they may just not know how to may not know how to respond, and that's totally fine. But having to battle that stigma can put a significant amount of pressure, stress, and even embarrassment on family caregivers. And that's just a stigma from their peers. There can also be a stigma from healthcare professionals and providers, which can have a negative outcome on both the care recipient and the caregiver. And for this particular reason, some people actually avoid seeing their doctors, which is so unfortunate. But one thing that I do want to say is that if we encounter stigma, then we should challenge it. And the way we challenge these social perceptions is by speaking up and just educating people on the issue. Because as Ms. Julia said, education is so important, because some people just may not know.
So how I know that most policies support family caregivers really target the recipient of the care. How can we provide better and comprehensive support to the family caregivers themselves?
Yes, so the way I approach caregiving is that I look at it through a different lens. So in my eyes, caregiver burnout, for example, is a holistic problem, and a holistic problem requires a holistic solution. So in order to provide better support to caregivers, we have to address their needs beyond the physical. So addressing their emotional needs, their mental needs, spiritual needs, and even financial needs. And by doing this, we prevent caregiver burnout and actually improve outcomes. And this can be anything from providing additional respite care to family caregivers, or even paying caregivers for their time. Because as I mentioned earlier, and as our panelists have mentioned earlier, caregiving can be a challenging experience. So, and it's a job in itself. Yes, and then I think Miss Julia also mentioned that people underestimate education and skills-based training. Oftentimes, caregivers, they are faced with performing both non-medical and medically specific tasks, but don't receive adequate training, which is so unfortunate, and that's an issue in itself. But we have to better prepare caregivers both for the known and unknown. Because I forgot who mentioned it. I took notes, but someone mentioned it. But it's just we have to better prepare them, because they don't know what they're getting into, or may not know or be prepared for the unexpected. So starting with both those hands-on training and education, I think is a great start to provide support.
So I know that many of the caregiver resources are not known by the caregivers. How do you propose we get that information out? Because there are so many family caregivers that don't realize that they're caregivers.
Yes.
And they don't seek information because they don't see themselves as caregivers. So how do we address that conundrum?
Yes, and we need to address it prior to. So, as our panelists mentioned, we cannot wait until the last minute. We cannot
Right.
wait until this, because everyone on this call, everyone that you know will become, like you said in that was a perfect quote that you stated, Ms. Cynthia, but everyone will become, or most of us will become a caregiver or will provide care to someone. So we have to prepare ahead of time. And to your statement, to your question, we have to, and someone else mentioned it, but we have to communicate, we have to educate and get that information out there before it happens. Because again, you may be in that situation, and Miss Julia said you may feel lost, you may not know what to do. I was in that situation and we did not know what to do. So just seeking, don't be embarrassed or don't feel like you have to carry that weight alone. So that's a big piece of it, but just communication, education, and seeking help. Because I know some caregivers, from personal experience, they do feel that sense of embarrassment, and feel like they got it, or they want to take care of everything on their own, and that's how caregiver burden starts. Feeling like you have to do everything on your own. So yeah, but those are the top things I would say we should do.
And your personal journey of caregiving, when did you realize that you were a caregiver?
Ooh, I would say I think early on. I think my mom and I, we both realized that early on. Because we didn't have a problem recognizing that, because once we recognized it and acknowledged that, then we knew what steps to take from there, or at least we thought we knew what steps to take from that point. So we recognized that early on, because we recognized that we called him Mr. Bob. I know Miss Julia had Miss Nellie, but we called our my grandfather Mr. Bob. But we recognize like the behavior patterns, like the changes in his mood. Like we recognize all that early on, and we decided, okay, we're going to become his primary caregiver and help take care of him. So yes, we recognize that very early on.
So I know you have a lot of experience in caregiving. What happens when a person refuses to receive the care? I know sometimes with dementia, they are obstinate and choose not to accept the offer of care. How do you deal with those type of situations?
Yes, and I just interviewed a nurse practitioner who is one of the very few practitioners in the state of Alabama who actually specializes in dementia care and providing this type of training. But you have to go into their world, is what is one quote that she stated. You have to get into their world. You can't refuse, or you can't argue with them. You just cannot. You just have to step into their world. Their world may seem a little crazy at times, and they may, like Mr. Bob, he was retired for 10 years. And every morning he would get up and say he's headed to work. So we would just say, no, they called and said that you're off today, so you don't even have to worry about it. We're just stepping into his world. So I would say, and it takes a lot of time and patience and understanding. And the panelist said compassion. You really just have to be compassionate about the situation and be sensitive to different things. But yes, we had some laughs, and we had some heartaches at times, but just stepping into that world and just making them feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, that's who it's about, them feeling comfortable. So yeah, I would say that.
So I know one of your goals is to change the way the society sees and values care. What would you share some of the ways we can accomplish this?
Yes. And the panelists, I keep referring to them, but they have stated a lot of everything that I said. But starting with the quote that you said first, I really stress this, but it's very, very important that everyone on this call, it doesn't matter, but most of us will become a caregiver to someone. I can't stress that enough. Or you may be the person in need of care at some point. So I really try to get people to understand that aging and care are both universal experiences that we all have and that we all will go through. But one thing that I do believe that we can do is promote caregiving across the full community and not just in the home. They say it takes a village, and there is so much power in community and coming together collectively to provide that support to caregivers, because we can't wait until the last minute. And this can be anything from providing additional support services, transportation services, or even assistance in the home. But there needs to be added support beyond the home. We have to get our community involved. And then also, Ms. Julia, she made the perfect statement. We have to shift the narrative, and we have to shift the narrative from the more dominant narrative that we see in the media or that we read about. Because as Ms. Julia stated, that the journalists, they don't know about the issue because it's not breaking news, so they just put out any type of narrative. But we have to shift the narratives from the more dominant narratives to ones that are more aligned into what we want to see, and ones that represent the true population of caregivers today. And this is actually something that I'm working on in my current fellowship program. But we have
talk a little bit about that fellowship program and
yes.
what you're doing in there. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with Caring Across Generations, but essentially I got connected to Caring Across Generations earlier this year. Didn't know much about it, but at the recommendation of an awesome director, decided to look more into it. But essentially, Caring Across Generation is a movement of former and active caregivers, supporters, influencers, legislators, but just all of everyone is coming together to work on building a better infrastructure for care. And essentially it is centered around advocacy work. But they run a fellowship program every year, and similar to the RISE program. It is a leadership development program that cultivates the advocacy and then the storytelling skills of family caregivers. But what I'm doing, I feel like all the things that I learned in the RISE program. So I'm taking that foundation that I built in the RISE program. So taking everything that I learned from developing my equity lens to transforming power to even crafting my why. But taking that foundation from RISE, carrying that along with me to this particular fellowship. And what they're doing here is they're helping me kind of elevate that foundation and amplify that a bit more. And then also teaching me how to advocate for policy change in my home state. So very, very great program, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, love it.
So proud that you're able to move forward and use ASA RISE as a foundation. So what is the storytelling aspect of the care fellow caring access across generations? What's that storytelling? What's that aspect of it?
Yes, so similar to what I was saying earlier, they are big supporters and big advocates of shifting the narrative, because the stories that we hear about, it seems like not all reporters, I don't want to group them into one category, but a lot of reporters, they seem to just want to get the sad and story of like caregiver being a burden. And Ms. Julia said it so perfectly. You get that opportunity to care for your parent or your loved one. You get that opportunity. It shouldn't be a burden. So that's why I hate to use the word burden. That any other word but burden. But they choose to be selective in how they present the story when it's far from the truth. But yes, so they're big on storytelling. And also, I know I was kind of shy with and hesitant with sharing my own personal story, but that's where it starts, with your personal story and hearing and sharing my personal story. So kind of crafting it to where it really has an impact on people when I do share it. So I'm still learning a lot, and still figuring out the best way to deliver and share my story in my way that I'm comfortable with. But I love it so much because they are just strong and really big advocates of just shifting that narrative to what caregiving is today.
So I'm going to ask you the question that I've asked the other two panelists. What kind of caregiver would you like, should you need one in the future?
Yes, so very similar to Ms. Julia, I kind of get this question from my family. When are we going to get, some grandkids? And just a ton of questions. So I don't have children at the moment, but I would say, well, one thing I want to point out is that one thing that I'm noticing with some older adults within my family is that I'm noticing behavior patterns and changes in their own within themselves. So I'm basically preparing for, anything. I'm not putting it on anyone in my family, but I'm preparing just in case, I do get in that situation of being a caregiver to like someone in my family, I should just say. So to your question, I'm kind of taking it from like, okay, let me be the caregiver that I would want to have. So someone who's compassionate, someone who's doesn't see caregiving as a burden, someone who's loving, who understands me. Because I'm sure if I don't have children, it may be someone in my family who provides the care, but it may not be. So I'm really just I keep stressing, I can't stress it enough that we have to prepare ahead of time, because you never know. You never know. So I would like to be, and I would like someone to be prepared both for, as I said earlier, for the known and unknown. So yeah, I hope they answered your question.
Well, it did, and I thank you. And I want to encourage our participants, if you have questions of our Angela and Dr. Thomas, to put them in the chat. We're going to get to the questions in just a few minutes. But Angela and Dr. Thomas, I have a question for both of you, and whomever wants to speak up can. ASA RISE is a fellowship for BIPOC individuals. Can you tell me how the fellowship prepared you to be a better caregiver and to have a perspective on caregiving that may have been different prior to the fellowship?
And I can jump in
Okay.
better. So how the program taught me how to be a better caregiver. So yes, so as I mentioned earlier, both I'm kind of just taking that foundation, and then the foundation that I'm building in my current fellowship program. I think it's really teaching me how to advocate for the voiceless. So speaking up for the voiceless and making the invisible visible, and then also advocating for policy change, and being that courageous leader that you all taught us how to be. So I think, even though I'm not a current caregiver, I think what both of the programs are doing is just preparing me for the unexpected, or preparing me, even if I have to care, for a friend. But both fellowship programs, I believe, is helping me develop, like I said, my advocacy, my storytelling, all of that. To advocate not only for myself, but other caregivers as well. Because as I mentioned earlier, I work with family caregivers, so advocating on their behalf and the behalf of others. So I would say that.
Thank you, Angela. Dr. Thomas?
Well, I would also add to that, thanks, Angela, is that we have to look at the entire family, not just looking at just that one person who contacts us for services. And usually when they're contacting us, it's in the midst of a crisis, and they may think they need one thing, but once they've had a conversation with us, find out that they need assistance in other areas. And we have to, when we're looking at the full picture, we have to look at what else is going on in the family as well. So when we hear someone talking about caregiving being a burden, what was the relationship between that individual and their loved one before this crisis? And understand why that person is saying it's a burden to them. So when we're supporting family caregivers, look at what other extensions of them that need support as well. It's not just that one person anymore. There's a whole other perspective involved around that caregiver's life as and should be included.
Yeah, so it seems to me that, we're all women of color on this call. And we hear so much about there being a dearth of caregiving individuals available to our population, to the BIPOC population. What can we do other than address policy, which takes forever to change, to make caregiving more accessible to the BIPOC population?
Well, one thing, having platforms such as this is very important, so that everyone that's involved, that's here, can
Mhm.
spread the word to other caregivers that they're connected with,
Mhm.
to start there. And then as caregivers, women of color caregivers, sometimes there is a saying that, we do what we do. If someone else doesn't do it, we do it. We
Mhm.
always want to be there, the ones that's picking up the slack and think that we can do it all, super women. But recognize we really aren't, and you need support from others. So let someone help you.
Mhm.
That is so key to women of color. Allow someone else to help you and support you. And it's okay. It's not showing a weakness. You're still a strong woman. Just take advantage of the support that you can get on this journey.
Yeah. Angela, did you have a comment?
Yes, yes, and I would add, one thing I want to say is that out of my current fellowship program, there are 25 fellows in my cohort, and out of those 25 fellows, 20 identify as BIPOC. So I want that to sink in, because that number not only represents my particular cohort, but the cohort for the entire program. So I wanted to point that out, because it shows that the number of BIPOC or caregivers who identify as BIPOC is on the rise. So to your point, Cynthia, although we can't really depend, I won't say we can't depend on it, but although, policy, it moves slow, our employers, can offer support services, or, community organizations can, like, we can seek out support from other avenues, other outside of policy. So I think just keeping up with that trend, and seeing, like, okay, what type of services can we provide? What type of support can we provide? And understanding that, and providing culturally sensitive support services, and then culturally, I can't even say that,
Culturally.
culturally care as well. So yes, just wanted to add that.
I know a number of states are working on master plans on aging, or MPAs. Some of you have probably heard about those. And I'm just curious, and I haven't done any research in this area, about how many of those plans have a priority, or at least even a piece, on a family caregivers, and how you do the outreach to them and provide resources to them. So my question is, what would you recommend to those states that are working on master aging plans? How do they develop a goal around family caregivers? What would be the goal, and what would be the objectives under that goal?
Well, I see Angela talked about a lot about hearing stories. And
Mhm.
so in those master plans, how much time is being addressed to hearing the stories from family caregivers in their particular areas? Are they listening to what's happening in the families, how it's affecting them emotionally, psychologically, financially, as well? What supports do they need? Just having a conversation with caregivers could make a huge impact on those master plans as well.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. And Angela, you've got 1 minute, because we only have
Yes,
2 minutes left.
yes, sure. I just want to say that I actually reached out to a couple of our RISE alum, because they actually work in this space. So I wanted to understand a bit more. But Dr. Thomas, she said it perfectly. Just reaching out, understanding their stories, and hearing their stories can definitely have an impact on those NPA plans. So yes.
Okay. Well, Angela and Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for being with us today. And audience, I want to thank you for joining us. I encourage you to look at the chat. There are a number of links there to some valuable information. Also, there is content available in the Generations journal, Generations Today, Generations Now, and look forward to other ASA RISE speak outs. We have a number of ASA RISE fellows that could do just as well as our ASA RISE fellows today. And we're going to be talking about different topics. And I just, a personal thank you to both Angela, and I'm going to call her Ernestine, because that's how we know you as part of ASA RISE. Thank you so much. And thank you all who joined us.
Yes, thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.